Alright guys, I'm going to try to make this review as short as possible and get right to the point. I bet you're wondering why I didn't review Chapter 60 if I reviewed Chapter 59 and reviewing Chapter 61. And it's simple, 60 just was not worth reviewing because nothing happened in that chapter that you didn't already expect. At the end of Chapter 59, it showed that Goku was about to lose the fight, and in the beginning of Chapter 61, it shows Goku back in base form, with bruises all over his face, his clothes are torn, and Moro is still alive, and he's facing off with Vegeta. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what happened in Chapter 60. So anyway, on to Chapter 61. This chapter had some interesting plot points, but they're only valid if you take Dragon Ball Super as its own separate continuity from Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, and I'm going to explain very thoroughly why that is. So let's get started here. Vegeta decides to ignore King Kai's stay-at-home order by coming back to Earth to get into the fight, and then he chooses to further ignore social distancing by getting closer to Moro at a distance of less than 6 feet. So Vegeta's actually able to keep up with Moro in this fight, and as you see here, he's actually able to get some pretty good hits on him. Like in this page right here, he tags him in the rib cage, kicks him pretty hard. You actually hear Moro, you see Moro kind of grunt in pain there, and you actually see the energy that Moro has been absorbing start to dissipate out of him. It's a technique that Vegeta refers to as forced spirit fission. Fission meaning dividing things that were once together. This technique is sort of the opposite of the Spirit Bomb. In the Spirit Bomb, it's not forced, it's voluntary, because remember how Goku and Vegeta and Hercule had to convince the Earthlings to give their energy to help Goku make the Spirit Bomb against Kid Buu? So in this case, with Vegeta, it's forced, whereas with the Spirit Bomb, it is voluntary, and in the Spirit Bomb, it's collecting it in one place, whereas with Fission, it's separating it out. So Vegeta sort of has the anti-Spirit Bomb, which is pretty cool, because if Goku ever tried to use a Spirit Bomb on Vegeta, Vegeta could just disperse it, and so their techniques perfectly balance each other out, and I think that's very fitting for the rival sort of dynamic that these two characters have. So we continue on with the fight, and Vegeta keeps weakening Moro to the point where Moro turns old again and literally starts throwing up all the energy that he had previously absorbed. But this is where the plot starts to come off the rails if you think that Dragon Ball Super is a continuation of Z. Piccolo and Vegeta are having a conversation about this technique, where Vegeta threatens to rip Kami and Nail out of him with the technique at some point. And Piccolo is just like, wait, what the hell? Why would you do that? And that's why you see this exclamation mark here. Now, this moment is pretty cool on its own, because this is basically showing how hacks Vegeta's abilities are now, and I think it's a pretty interesting way to advance the plot. However, this does not line up with Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball whatsoever. The long story short is, if this technique has existed this whole time, Supreme Kai, or at the very least the old Kai, had to have known about it. And if they knew about it, then why didn't they use it against Majin Buu? You got to think about that. Majin Buu gained his power through absorption. The minute that the muscular Supreme Kai got absorbed, why didn't Supreme Kai use this technique to split them apart? If he's a Kai, he watches over all the planets, he ought to know that people exist that can defuse people, so why didn't he do it then? That's why this series doesn't really fit together. Why didn't King Kai think to use it against Cell if the Yardrats were in Goku's section of the universe? King Kai should have known about this technique. Why didn't he teach Goku this technique so that he could use it against Cell or any other kind of absorptions? So that's why this really doesn't make any sense. I mean, even with Majin Buu, the minute Majin Buu absorbed Gotenks, Supreme Kai should have teleported from his planet down to Earth, use this technique to rip Gotenks out of him, and then say, okay, we got Gotenks out, Gohan, go ahead and kick his ass. And that's just a greater problem of trying to reconcile Dragon Ball Z with Dragon Ball Super. If you look at all the universes and all the planets that supposedly exist in Dragon Ball Super, those things would have been a lot more useful earlier on in the series. Or this even just ruins Dragon Ball Super itself, because think about this. If this technique supposedly existed, Why didn't Supreme Kai just go get a Yard Rat to split apart Zamasu so that they could just kill Goku Black and so that the immortal Zamasu would have no one to fuse with? So it even ruins Dragon Ball Super itself. Just like in a few chapters ago, they had these sort of Sonic the Hedgehog people that could open teleportation portals. Why not bring one of those guys to the Tournament of Power instead of freaking Krillin? Because those guys could just open a wormhole to the spectator stand and you could just push characters through the hole and eliminate them very quickly. It ends up ruining the series because it just brings the question, well, why didn't they use this stuff sooner if it supposedly always existed? Anyway, let's advance through the plot here. He starts giving the energy back involuntarily that he's stolen, and it starts bringing the dead Nameks back. And Eska's explanation for why their bodies didn't rot is because there were Dragon Balls left behind on the planet. I don't see how that makes any sense. So Dragon Balls can allow people to stay kind of dead, but not actually dead. Not active Dragon Balls, mind you, because these Dragon Balls had already been used and turned into stone. The mere existence, the mere presence of Dragon Balls on a planet, not a wish being made on them, just the balls just sitting there, allows a character to be dead but not be really dead. They've retconned their way into a hole here. That's why I think that you have to take Dragon Ball Super as its own separate continuity. It is not part of Dragon Ball Z. It is not a sequel to Dragon Ball Z. Don't try to fit it between the last two chapters of Dragon Ball Z. It is its own separate fan art series. Now, let's continue, because that just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So we get later on to the fight, and Moro and Vegeta start having some philosophical discussion where Vegeta admits that he's a villain. At the end of the day, I'm a villain. Well, that's been debunked in Dragon Ball Z because when they had Porunga revive everybody except the villains, Vegeta came back, proving that he's not a villain. So this Vegeta apparently is somehow still a villain, despite in the Buu Saga Porunga declared him not a villain. This is obvious that these are two separate series. I think that basically Dragon Ball Super has gone the way of Pokemon. It's not about plot. It's just about introducing new characters and new transformations so you can sell toys. At this point, the Dragon Ball Super manga is down on the same level as Dragon Ball Heroes. It's just junk that's just for promotional purposes only. It has no plot. We go back to this sort of ship here that Moro brought in, and he gobbles up 7-3. He literally grabs him and swallows him whole and transforms into some freaking ugly fan art. And the story ends right there for that chapter.